My Mother, The Person and the Patient is an original podcast written and hosted by me, Fortuna Kuso. This podcast is about my mother, Timira Abdussamid Mohammed, Ayaya we call her, and that's the Somali word for grandmother, and her great-grandchildren call her Ayaya too, and that is their way of saying great-grandmother. This past December, Alzheimer's presented me yet with its newest surprise. One night I was putting my mother to bed and I noticed there was this pimple looking, the pimples you used to get on your face when you were a teenager, on her lower back. As I was getting her ready for bed, I noticed and I ran my hand over it and it felt a little bit warm, but it was really small. So I put some lotion over it and I told myself I should keep an eye on this. What is this? Because if that was a pimple where it was located, didn't really make sense. It was in her lower back. So I put her to bed. And next morning when I woke up and I was getting her ready for shower, every morning I get her out of bed around 7 o'clock, 6:45, and I take her to shower, get her ready for her day before I head out to work. And as I was doing that, I noticed that little pimple was twice as large just overnight. It just doubled in size just overnight. So I'm just thinking, this has really got big. What is going on? So I get her ready and I go to work. On my lunch break, I called the nurse and I explained it to the nurse what is going on. And she said, I am going to go and see her today. So I asked her if it was possible for her to see my mother after I got back from work. There was something about this that just somewhat rattled me because of where it was. It didn't look like a heat rash, except it was weirdly there. And the fact that it doubled in size within like 8 or 9 hours, because I put my mother to bed around 9 o'clock. And when I got her up a little bit before 7 next morning, it was twice the size. So that was kind of like shocking. So the nurse said, okay, I'll meet you there 3:30. So by the time I come back that afternoon, it's redoubled again. So the nurse looks at it and kind of like takes this ruler and measures all around. And then she said, this doesn't look good. So I'm going to make an appointment with the doctor and have the doctor come in and take a look at your mother. So the nurse contacted the doctor's office, and then the doctor's office called me and said, would it be possible if we came such and such time tomorrow? So they came in. It was a pimple on Sunday night when I was putting my mother to bed. And now it's Tuesday evening, maybe around 4:30, and it's the size of an egg. That thing just exploded like wildfire. So the doctor looks at it and then she does the same thing the nurse did. She measures, she touches it. It's really getting red. It's hot to the touch. I said, this thing was really this small. I must have said that 4 or 5 times because I wasn't even sure if the doctor was believing what I was telling her. I said, Sunday evening when I noticed it, it was smaller than a seed, but now it's almost like a round and big and bulgy and really hot and red, and it feels like almost like an egg. Maybe I'm exaggerating when I say an egg, but it's really big. So the doctor looks at it and then she says, yeah, I hear you. I understand what you're telling me. She said, this is an abscess, and if you see the size you see outside, it might be twice deeper inside. It's possible that it was growing inside and now it just came out and there's more to it than what we see. I'm just thinking, what? There is more to it than what we see? And then the doctor says, so what do you want? What do you mean, what do I want? I want help with this thing growing on my mother's lower back. And she said, if we take your mother to the hospital, then the hospital can do imaging, if we need to cut in and take something out, we can do that. So if you want to go to the hospital, there would be more access to imaging, more access to invasive treatment. That's how she put it. But if you want to keep your mother at home, we can keep her comfortable and we can treat what this is, but we might not be able to do as much intervention. And I said, I know my mother would not lay there for any kind of imaging because she doesn't understand what's going on. You can't explain it to her for her to sit still or to lay still. She's not going to do that. And I really don't want any invasive procedures on her at this point. So she looked at me and she said, in that case, do you have DNR? That is abbreviation for do not resuscitate, which is if my mother ran into trouble, we're not going to do anything invasive. And I said, yes, I had this for the last 10 years. I got it while my mother was still cognitively with me, and I could explain it to her and ask her what her wishes were. So if you have a loved one at the early stages of Alzheimer's or any kind of disease that alters their ability to be cognitively available to make their own decisions at the point of needing those treatments, it's a great idea to get do not resuscitate form. Your doctor fills it out where you get a serial number that's just attached to that. And she said, okay, let me see the do not resuscitate. I give it to her. Doctor says to me, hey, you need to make sure this do not resuscitate forms is readily available. And if you want to keep your mother at home, we're going to make sure she is as comfortable as possible. We're going to offer her comfort care, make sure we treat this growth, as long as you know that we're not going to be able a lot of invasive treatments at home. So are you sure you want to keep her at home? Yes, I'm sure I want to keep her at home. She said, okay, let's sit down together and come up with a plan of treatment. When you listen to how we arrived at my mother's diagnosis and what followed, it's so easy to see her just as the patient, to see her as nothing more than the disease that reduced her to shell of her old self. But I want to also to tell you about my mother, the person, the fierce woman that told her stories unapologetically, celebrating the beautiful parts and harsh realities equally. I want to share with you the stories she told us about her life as a girl growing up in a small village, the tales that marked her adulthood. I want to share with you all her losses and the ultimate winnings. The following chapter is one of those stories, reconstructed from my childhood memory. Taking the cursed finger, an act used to settle disputes, was considered dreadful, even an abomination. There were stories of people who lost herds of cattle and crops ready to be harvested because they chose the cursed finger. Parents lost their children because they took the cursed finger to win a land dispute. Like Timira had done to regain her freedom, she'd expected something tragic to happen to her the moment she grasped the finger. She waited for a large hand to descend from the sky and smack her over the head, reducing her to dust upon impact. Perhaps her heart would stop beating, no blood coursing through her veins, or her lungs to freeze in place, caught in the space between inhaling and exhaling. She thought she would collapse in front of everyone and die. A long minute passed, but nothing happened. Still, all eyes remained on her, unblinking, expectant. They were waiting for her ultimate demise. You can sit down now. Timira didn't realize she was standing in place until her village elder ordered. One step in front of the other, she moved toward her seat, expecting the ground beneath her to shift. And she was okay with that. That would have been a dignified end to this terrible event. She wouldn't panic or flail in the departure. She was sure of that. She would leave as quietly as her mother had done. After a few more steps, nothing happened. She reached her seat before she realized she could still breathe and air in and out with little effort. How was this possible? She didn't feel dizzy or discombobulated. Her heart must have been working fine. Did she pick the cursed finger? A new fear gripped her. Maybe she'd made a terrible mistake, held the wrong finger, and she would have no choice but to go with needs a cane. The elder raised his hand. The crowd hushed. Timiro chose to leave her marriage. The elder spoke carefully, and Ise agreed to accept our decision. Hearing that statement, Timiro ran her hands over her body. She had done the thing most dreaded by the villagers. But the calamity that should have followed such an act never came. She was still in one piece. She looked up and made eye contact with her father. There was a relief on his face, even a smile. Was it a smile that she saw? She took a deep breath and decided to wait. For whatever that followed, she knew she'd made the right decision for herself. She'd expected to be happy with that realization. She thought her time to celebrate her hard-fought freedom from the grasp of Nietzsche Kane was finally at hand. But the joy that propelled her forward died quickly, and the weight of her action came down on her at once. She sat next to Nietzsche Kane as his elder listed what they expected from her father. "We need the dowry to be returned," he began. 15 goats and 2 cows. Timiro's father nodded. That seemed to satisfy Nietzsche Kane and his elder. He made no demand for her father to speak to it. "Do you have everything?" Nietzsche Kane's elder asked. "We're missing the 2 goats we slaughtered for the guests." Timiro's father spoke with resignation, perhaps even defiance. "I'll raise the funds to pay for those." Timiro gasped, shocked that they wanted him to replace the goats they ate. The whole thing was despicable, but she had no one to blame but herself. Perhaps she should have listened to her father when he tried to dissuade her from the union. Maybe she should have followed through with her decision to marry him and stay with Nietzsche Kane, for she'd forced her father to agree. "We'll give you until next summer to do that." Nietzsche Kane's elder turned to her village elder. "Is that acceptable?" Timiro's father looked up for the first time at the man. "Yes, I'll have it to you by the next summer." "I'm sorry, Abo," Timiro said as soon as her father closed the door behind them to shut out the villagers that followed them from the square. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said. "Nothing." "I wanted to make things easier." Timiro's heart ached, but I made them even harder. She continued to stare at the ground beneath her feet. "The honor is in the attempt, not the outcome," her father said. "You tried." Part of her wanted for her father to be mad at her, to chastise her for what she'd done, fighting to marry a man older than he was, only to flee his house 6 weeks later. He should have displayed his disappointment. He didn't. So she hugged him and wrapped his kindness all around her. The wisdom in his words would serve as her protection. "I love you, Abo." "Not as much as I love you," he said, pulling her and Farah into his tight embrace, his gentle arms wrapped around them in the protective shell of his love. It began in the middle of the night, 4 weeks after she'd gained her freedom from Nietzsche Kane. She'd been in bed for hours when it happened. It was gradual, the tiniest of hints of something bubbling in the pit of her stomach, a level of dizziness so faint she had to pay close attention to identify it. It was there all the same. She swallowed a couple of times when she noticed her stomach coming up to her throat, a quarter of an inch at a time. At the first sign of trouble, she lay on her back and pressed her body to the straw mat. She stretched her legs flat and wrapped her arms around herself. She held her breath until her head stopped swimming, and the butterflies in her stomach retracted their wings. The relief was short-lived. It lasted only long enough for her to take one agonizing breath. Soon, intense sensation engulfed her, as if her organs were fighting to leave her body. Her heart beat fast. The blood entering and leaving it made it a whooshing sound in her ears. After each inhale, her lungs burned, setting her insides aflame. Her chest heaved up and down, lifting her entire body with it. Timira bolted out of bed and almost tumbled over Farah. She avoided falling over her brother, but didn't have enough time to get to the outhouse. She retched by the door, emptying her stomach content in one go. But she continued to gag until the bitter and hot bile coated her tongue. Here, her father held the mug of water in front of her. She didn't know how long he stood over her, but his gentle hand rested on her forehead, pushing her sweat-matted hair back. Rinse your mouth, he said. Thank you. Was she that loud to wake him up? It must be something I ate, maybe, her father said. Once it set on her, nausea refused to abate. Nothing worked. Her stomach remained in perpetual motion no matter what she ate or didn't eat. Timiro spent more time running to the outhouse than she'd done doing all her other chores combined. But her father didn't seem bothered by her illness. The usually worried expression that covered his brow whenever his children were ill didn't appear on his face. He didn't offer to read healing verses from the Quran over her as he'd always done. He didn't go to the village traditional healer to gather herbs for her stomach. As the week wore on, her situation only got worse. But her father did not attempt to take her to the medical facility in the city as he'd done before when she was sick. I feel like I'm dying, Timiro told her father at the end of that first week. I can't keep anything down. You will get well soon. If her father's uncharacteristic response didn't tip her to something beyond being made sick by eating rotten egg for breakfast, the whispers that followed her from the field to the water well and the cooking shed alarmed her. Timira was grinding the millet when Marian approached her. It was only 10 days from the morning of her first vomit. You're carrying his little one, Marian whispered. The statement startled Timira so much that her hand moved to her belly instinctively. The wooden stick fell out of the grinding stone, spilling flour. Yes, Marian rested her hand over Timira's head. Like a scorpion, he stung you with his poison. That's why your belly is refusing to rest. Timira pushed Marian's hand away. That didn't bother Marian. She continued for a long time, but Timira heard nothing after the scorpion comment. Her mind raced with all the possibilities and what-ifs. Was it possible she was pregnant? Was her desire to leave Nietzsche Kane and his smell behind all for naught? She couldn't be having his child, not after her father had given all the dowry back. Timiro's father had promised Nietzsche Kane and his elder that Timiro would never come after them for anything. Even if she bears my child, Nietzsche Kane shouted at the time, not until that child is 7, then he'll be mine. Did he know he'd left his awful seed inside her? I know how you must be feeling. Marian spoke again. You don't know how I feel. She had no idea her statement had shattered all serenity Timira had gained from the freedom. Trouble landing on her, one layer after another, a crushing defeat. All you have to do is send the word to your husband and return to your house, Marian said. You can change your mind for 90 days after the divorce. Marian might have spoken as a mother counseling an inexperienced, wayward daughter. Timiro suspected those words didn't leave Marian's lips to wound. But the statement hurt all the same. The pain reached Timiro's heart, wringing all life out of it. She shook under the grip of the darkness that descended on her with the revelation. Of all the doubt that riddled her mind, she was sure she would never return, not to Nietzsche Kane's city, house, or bed. Timiro gathered her grinding stone, millet sack, and coarse flour, wished Marian peace, and went home. When Timiro told her father that night, he only smiled. When did you know? She asked. When you started throwing up. And you didn't say anything? I am your father. He stopped as if that explained anything. It didn't, so he continued. Fathers are not supposed to tell such things to their daughters. He stopped here. She understood what he would say. It's the mother's job. None of this would have happened if she hadn't left us behind, broken, Timiro said. Your mother didn't leave us. She died. None of us get the option to die. Hot anger erupted inside her. I'm not going back to him. The fury turned into sadness and she started to cry. Her father got up, gathered her in his arms. Hush now. You're not going anywhere. You are home. Hush now. He held her like that for a long time, repeating his promise to keep her at home. In his embrace, Timiro continued to sob. 20 minutes had passed before the tears subsided. Her breathing grew even. I have to go to the cooking shed to start supper. Her father kissed the top of her head one more time. I am here. And with that, she went to the cooking shed, wearing her father's words as a safety cloak against all the glares coming her way. My Mother, the Person and the Patient can be found in Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to follow, like, and share, and join me next week as I share with you another episode of my mother's journey as both the person and the patient. Thank you.